Order. I thank the honourable member for Nichols. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to express my very strong support for the National Broadband Networks Companies Amendment Commitment to Public Ownership Bill 2024, which was introduced by the fabulous Minister for Communications, because in the 21st century, the digital landscape is transforming how we interact with one another, how our economies grow and how people live and work. Access to the internet is absolutely no longer a luxury. It is a necessity, part of everyday life, and it underpins almost every aspect of our lives. The bill here before us today is not just a legislative proposal, it is a commitment to the future. A future where connectivity is a right, not a privilege. It's a bold step toward ensuring that all Australians, regardless of their geographic location or socio-economic status, have access to reliable and affordable internet services. And I'd have to say I would have thought this is particularly attractive to members representing the regions, as am I. In an age where digital access is essential for education, healthcare and economic opportunity, we must ensure that our broadband infrastructure is owned and operated in public interest. We know that in our digital economy, those that are left without access are left behind. During the pandemic, we witnessed firsthand how critical connectivity was for remote education and accessing healthcare. That's why it's stunning to see members from the National Party opposing this bill. By committing to public ownership, we are ensuring that these essential services are not held hostage by the profit motives of private corporations. Truly, I think most people in Australia are on board with this. We just need those opposite to open their ears and listen to the arguments. We are also making sure that the NBN workforce have job security. Workers can breathe a sigh of relief knowing their jobs won't be on the chopping block because of privatisation. This bill reaffirms the Albanese Labor government's dedication to public ownership, prioritising the needs of our citizens over profits. We want to make it clear that under the Albanese Labor government, the NBN is not for sale. We know how important the NBN is to driving national productivity, and we know how important it is for the transactions that Australians do every day to access health services, to interact with government and to connect with families and friends. It is for this reason that we have made this decision. It's not a complex question here. You either want to keep the NBN in public ownership or you don't. The bill will make amendments to the National Broadband Companies Act 2011 and other small changes to the NBN Act and to the Telecommunications Act. These changes will include incorporating new wording to make clear that keeping the NBN preserved in public ownership is an explicit requirement. This builds on the Albanese Labor government's election commitment to retain the NBN in public ownership, to keep broadband affordable and to complete building a world-class fibre network on top of the government's commitment to keep protecting the NBN from privatisation through the Statement of Expectations issued in 2012. Public ownership fosters accountability and transparency. By keeping our national broadband network in public hands, we can ensure that decisions are made with the community's best interests at heart. And this transparency is vital for maintaining public trust. Australians deserve to know where their taxpayer dollars are being spent and how decisions about their connectivity are made. Public ownership will mean that the NBN will be accountable to the people it serves, and writing it into law will further enshrine that. Let's have a little look at the record from members opposite, the coalition, in their rolling out of the NBN. Because communities in my electorate of Newcastle have told me very loud and clear that the job of upgrading the NBN is not complete. When the NBN was first proposed by Labor back in 2008, it was envisaged to be a transformative project, one that would connect Australians, boost our economy and positions us as a leader in the digital age. However, what we witnessed over the next 10 years, under the Coalition's decade of denial and delay, was a litany of mismanagement and unmet promises that left many Australians disappointed, angry and frustrated. Just as they sold out Australia on the privatisation of Telstra, the Coalition sold out Australia again on the botched implementation. Those opposite rolled out a second-rate NBN that relied on the old copper network instead of Labor's super-fast fibre-to-the-premises NBN. Their decision to pivot from the original fibre-to-the-premises model to a multi-technology mix has had significant long-term ramifications that the Australian public are paying for again and again. As a result, millions of Australians have been left waiting for access to reliable internet that many in urban areas take for granted. Many communities were left with inadequate service. Speeds that were once promised fell very short, and the reliability of the connection often inconsistent. In regional and rural communities, the digital divide was further exacerbated, limiting opportunities for education, business and connection. Those opposite rushed out this second-rate NBN, perhaps in order to declare it complete so that they could put it on the block for sale, selling out Australian consumers and regional communities like mine. Residents and businesses in my community were particularly hard hit by this botched rollout. Only the 2,800 homes and businesses in a very select area of Mayfield were lucky enough to get the real NBN. Everyone else in Newcastle had to put up with this second-rate version that relied on an old copper network. Residents in places like Hamilton, who had good access to a good quality ADSL, were on top of the former government's rollout list, whilst the people of Katara, who could not access even low-quality broadband, were left in the dark. Residents in Stockton, Adamstown, Merewether and others are to this day feeling the impacts of this botched rollout. Access to high-speed broadband is an essential service, and it's a shame that the former Coalition government could not see that. We must learn from these failures. As we move forward, we need a renewed commitment to provide high-quality, accessible internet for all Australians. And this means the mistakes of the past and the future-proofing of the NBN. This is something the Albanese Labor government has been working hard to do. We are committed to fixing the dodgy rollout we saw under the previous government, which continues to have long-term consequences. Our government has been consulting widely on regional telecommunications services and has received feedback from communities, particularly in rural and regional Australia, that there is strong support for the NBN. This legislation has been introduced to ensure that it is owned by those who it belongs to, the Australian people. And this is in addition to what we've already done, including investing $2.4 billion to expand full fibre across the NBN, and that will access an additional 1.5 million premises, including 660,000 rural and regional communities. So it literally is gobsmacking that any regional member would speak against this bill. Rolling out free NBN broadband services to up to 30,000 families under the Australian Government's School Student Broadband Initiative, delivering fibre upgrades so that more than 9 million homes and businesses can access the fastest broadband speeds on the NBN, and from September next year, boosting download speeds by up to 5 times the current speeds at no extra wholesale costs. A household or small business with a 100 megabytes per second plan in 2024 will benefit from 500 megabytes per second in 2025. Rolling out more fibre into a fixed-line network, upgrading the fixed wireless network and planning for our future needs. That's the focus of the Albanese Labor government. The fibre and fixed wireless upgrades we took to the 2022 election are being delivered on time and on budget, which is effectively a first for any government. Not that we're hearing any thanks from those opposite for ensuring their communities are getting access to a properly effective, efficient broadband. Fixed wireless upgrades are on track to be completed by the end of this year. This work has seen over 2,300 towers being upgraded, speed capability boosted on Fixed Wireless Plus, and 2 new fixed-speed products available. NBN's on track to deliver our plan for 90% of houses and businesses to have gigabyte access by the end of 2025. And this work is in addition to the fixed wireless upgrades and has seen over 70,000 kilometres of new fibre being rolled out. Because of our strong investment in the NBN, Australians are now taking up fibre upgrades in record numbers, which is leading to better customer experience and less faults and fewer technicians. By maintaining public ownership, we can continue to prioritise investment in our underserved areas, ensuring that everyone, no matter their postcode, has access to high-quality internet. Moreover, public ownership allows us to focus on long-term goals rather than short-term profits. Keeping the NBN in public hands will provide the NBN company the certainty needed to continue delivering improvements to the network while keeping prices affordable. The NBN is not just about connectivity. It is about building a foundation for innovation and economic growth. When focus shifts from profit margins to public service, we can invest in the future. This means expanding the network capabilities, upgrading technology and preparing for the demands of tomorrow's digital landscape. Government ownership is essential to delivering our strategy for a more connected Australia, including rolling out more fibre in the fixed-line network and planning for the transition to the next generation satellites and modernising universal service obligations. We must consider the global context, of course, when talking about the importance of a good national broadband network, and we know across the world there have been some very inspiring examples of successful public broadband initiatives. In countries like Sweden and Finland, where public investment in infrastructure has been prioritised, we can see some of the fastest and most reliable internet services available. In the United States, several municipalities have taken it upon themselves to build their own broadband networks. Cities like Chattanooga in Tennessee have demonstrated that public ownership can lead to faster, more reliable services at lower costs than those provided by other companies. I think the point really here is there's many more examples I could point to, but Australia must not continue to fall behind. Our place in the world depends on our ability to stay connected. By passing this bill, we're positioning ourselves as a leader in the digital infrastructure, ensuring that we can compete in the global economy and foster homegrown innovation. The NBN is just much more than a utility. It is a catalyst for economic growth and technological innovation. It supports business, it creates new industries and connects our workforce with the rest of the world. From online education to telemedicine, from start-ups to large corporations, the NBN is a vital resource in the modern economy. We know there is more to do to get the NBN to the world-leading stage that the Albanese Labor government envisaged. That is our ambition for the Australian people, and that is why this bill is so important. This bill is not just about maintaining ownership of the NBN, as important as that is. It is about protecting a vital public asset that serves the interests of all Australians. It's about equity accountability and ensuring that every Australian can access the opportunities that a reliable broadband network provides. It's a testament to the Albanese Labor government's values and our vision for an inclusive and equitable society. The NBN is a lifeline to the future of our nation, and keeping it in public ownership is essential to continue to provide modern, accessible, affordable communication services for all Australians. Let us continue to invest in it, protect it and improve it. That's why I'm supporting this bill today.
I thank the honourable member for Newcastle. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Menzies.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, if I was to stand in this place and express a fear about a future government banning Anzac Day, and then presented a bill that said this will stop a future government doing that, I would be laughed out of this place, because I'm not taking it seriously. If I was to say that I'm scared and worried about a future government banning Christmas, and I said, well, here's a bill to stop a future government banning Christmas, I would be rightly laughed out of this place. Laughed out of this place. If I was to say, Deputy Speaker, I'm worried about future governments legislating to kill all firstborn males, and here's a bill to stop it, I would quite rightly be laughed out of this place. And that's all this is. This is a joke by the Labor government on the Australian people. It is a joke that goes for 6 pages, that is designed for one purpose, to be put on a tile on social media or a DL in your letterbox. So to Australians who are watching, if you are going to get one of those DLs in the next few months, or you see it pop up on an ad, know that this government is not treating you with the respect that you deserve. Because the other thing you're getting in your letterbox, other than a DL that has this rubbish on it, is your increased power bills, your increased insurance, your increased gas. And there's nothing coming from this government to address those problems. Instead, they sat around in a tactics meeting with empty pizza boxes thinking, what are we going to do? What's some issue we can manufacture to scare people? Not to inspire people, but to scare them. And on that, I'd like to reference the Prime Minister's own words. The Prime Minister, in 2012, in a press club speech, said this about an Australian Prime Minister, Australian opposition leader. He said, in Australia we have serious challenges to solve, and we need serious people to solve them. Unfortunately, and this is quoting Anthony Albanese, Tony Abbott is not the least bit interested in fixing anything. He is only interested in 2 things, making Australians afraid of it and telling them who's to blame for it. Now, those words were given in the press club in 2012 by the now Prime Minister. They were so inspiring, Deputy Speaker, so inspiring, they featured in a Hollywood movie 17 years earlier, when Aaron Sorkin had then Michael Douglas, acting as the American president, said this, and it might sound familiar, Deputy Speaker. We have serious problems to solve, and we need serious people to solve them. And whatever your particular problem is, I promise you, Bob Rumson is not the least bit interested in solving it. He is only interested in 2 things, making you afraid of it and telling you who's to blame for it. Wow. Well, Deputy Speaker, the person who came up with this bill knows that we have serious problems to solve, and we need serious problems to solve them. But that person's not one of them. He's interested in 2 things, making you afraid of it, that this might be sold, the NBN might be sold, and telling you who's to blame for it. That is the only purpose, the only purpose. So when Prime Minister Anthony Albanese channelled Aaron Sorkin in the press club in 2012, he needed to heed his own advice, and this is not a serious bill. Because, Deputy Speaker, what we've been asked to do by this Labor government is to amend their own bill, And many speakers before me have referred to these particular quotes, but they are worth repeating. In the then minister's statement, which was then Stephen Conroy, the heading said this: Government committed to the sale of NBN Co. The heading. And then Senator Conroy said this is in a press media release from him. Senator Conroy said the Gillard government remained firmly committed to selling its stake in NBN Co after the network was fully built and operational, subject to market conditions and security considerations. Now, that was on the 22nd of November 2010. And then 3 days later, in a speech given by the member for Grayndler, the Prime Minister, as he was then the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, he said in his speech to this bill, the original bill for the Act we're amending, it also sets out arrangements for the eventual sale of the Commonwealth stake in the company once the NBN rollout is complete, including provisions for independent and parliamentary reviews prior to any privatisation, and for the Parliament to have the final say on the sale. So we had a Labor government with the then Prime Minister committing to the sale of NBN. And we've been asked to take this government seriously on this joke of a bill which is designed for one purpose, which is to scare people and be put on material on their screens and in their letterboxes. Because this government has a choice. And instead of sitting around in tactics meetings about what goes on tiles and DLs, they should be turning their mind to solving real problems that Australians have. That's what a serious government would do. That's what a serious Prime Minister would do. So if you want to help Australians, you would cut back bloated government spending. And, Deputy Speaker, we saw recently that government spending in the June quarter had blown out to 27.3% of GDP. And if we carve out the COVID period and we go back to the norm, pre-COVID, it was averaging at 22.5%. So think about that, 22.5% of GDP bumped up to 27.3% by this government. That is totally unsustainable and is directly contributing to inflation in this country. So instead of a DL being shoved in through their letterbox, they should be answering to the Australian public why government spending is increasing inflation and increasing everything, including interest rates on their mortgage. And if you wanted to scare and distract instead of actually solving problems, whenever we raise that issue, the government says, well, what services are they going to cut? Like there's no waste or bloat in the federal government. Of course there is. Of course there is. But this government is not the least bit interested in finding it or cutting it. They are throwing taxpayers' money away. And not just taxpayers now, future taxpayers, our children and our grandchildren who will be forced to wear this debt. Deputy Speaker, if a serious government wanted to help Australians, they would also do things like bringing energy down and having energy security for this country, and seriously considering support for a civil nuclear industry. And a non-serious government, a joke of a government, would do other things. They wouldn't engage in that debate seriously. They'd produce memes of three-headed fish. And that's what we saw from this government. It's not a serious government. They're not the least bit interested in solving serious problems. Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to help Australians, you would make sure that our migration is proportionate for our capacity to deal with it at all levels, federal and state. And instead, through the term of this government, we have seen net overseas migration go to 1.5 million people. I'm from the great state of Victoria, and we have that temple that is the MCG. It holds 100,000. So net overseas migration in this term of the parliament is 15 of those. 15. In a country of 27 million people, with a housing crisis, with a cost of living crisis. Now, the government may claim, oh, we can't really pull the levers to fix that. It's not in our control. They may have that debate, and we heard some of that in question time. But what we hear when we have debates about migration is members on the other side stand up and accuse us of engaging in dog whistles for even suggesting that that should be a debate. That's not the sign of a serious government. That's a sign of a government that's more interested in the lines, more interested in DLs, more interested in tiles, not the least bit interested in solving problems. Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to really help Australians, you would make sure that our nation is secure. And at the same time, we have seen public servant positions grow by 26,000. We have seen the full-time ADF drop by 5,000. Now, 5,000 as a proportion of our full-time ADF is 1 in 12. Imagine 12 ADF members sitting around. There's one missing on every table. Now, each of those people were supposed to bring capability that keeps this nation secure. But if you wanted to scare and distract, instead, you wouldn't fix that problem. You wouldn't talk about the monumental delays in ADF recruiting. You'd come up here with a silly bill that's more of a talking line. That's all you would do. Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to actually help Australians, you would address the scourge of online gambling. And despite the Murphy report sitting on the desk of the Minister and the Prime Minister, we keep going month after month and week after week of this government doing nothing. Doing nothing. Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to actually help Australians, you would back in free speech. You would back in free speech because it is the fundamental right on which all others flow. Free speech isn't just about talking, it's about thinking. It isn't about narrative, it's about truth. It's through free speech that we get to have the contest of ideas. With open hearts and open minds, we actually get to see if our ideas hold water. And if they don't, and if we actually have an open mind and an open heart, we will move further to the truth. That's what you would do if you were serious and wanted to help people. Instead, we have this government producing its mad bill where it wants us to move closer to a technocracy, where particular people are carved out, including us in this place, or academics or journalists. But ordinary Australians, you're not allowed to have free speech. Not you. Not you. You will be governed by your betters. That's not the sign of a serious government that believes in things. Deputy Speaker, if you actually wanted to help Australians, you would address the cost of food that has risen by 12%. You would address the cost of housing that has risen by 13%. You would address the cost of rents that have gone up 16%, and you would look at insurance at 17% through this term, and gas, which people use to cook their food and we need for our industry, is up 33%. But instead, this non-serious joke of a government comes in and waves around more spending on the symptoms and not the cause. And that's all we get from this government, increasing the very thing that's fueling inflation, and at the same time saying, oh, don't worry about that. Here's a little bit of help. I'll throw some more of your money back at you and say I'm fixing it. So increase your bills by $100, but then say, you're fine, here's $10 more. Don't worry about it. It's all good. A serious government would look at the causes of inflation, not the symptoms. A serious government would address bloated government spending because we know that that is the singular cause of increasing inflation in this country, and the RBA has told us that. Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to actually help Australians, you would seriously look at productivity in this country. And flatlining productivity has led to 6 quarters of negative GDP growth per person. That's the only measure that matters. It's the only measure that matters. And instead, to avoid a technical recession, we've seen this government crank the levers they say they don't control to prop up net overseas migration, to say, oh, well, how good are we? We've avoided a technical recession. Well, avoiding a technical recession has nothing to do with how people feel, nothing to do with the real lived experiences of Australians who are begging for inflation to come down, who actually want this government to control its spending because they're controlling theirs, who actually want to make sure that they're not leaving their children a worse future than they were inherited for themselves. A serious government would address those problems. A joke of a government would introduce bills like this. And very soon, Deputy Speaker, Australians will go to the polls and they will give their assessment on this government. And they'll say, in these really tough times, were they focused on the things that mattered to me and my family and my community, or were they more focused on themselves? And they'll have to ask, when they get that DL through the letterbox, or they see that tile on Instagram or Facebook, is this really all you did? Is this all you did? And I think, as many others have asked, they will ask themselves, am I better off than I was 3 years ago? And the answer to that, Deputy Speaker, is an absolute no.
Order. I thank the honourable member for Menzies. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Gilmore.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, we know Australians living in regional areas like my electorate of Gilmore are struggling with cost of living pressures. So the last thing they need is for our national broadband network to be sold off. pushing up their home internet bills and risking their privacy. Small businesses in my electorate are doing it tough as well, and they can't afford for the NBN to be sold, hiking up their communication costs and risking the stability of their connectivity. Gilmore has been hit hard by a series of natural disasters, including flooding, ferocious storms and, of course, the devastating Black Summer bushfires. In times of emergency, it is crucial for residents and small businesses on the New South Wales South Coast to have access to reliable internet to stay connected with family and friends and, of course, emergency services during their time of need. That's why I support this Albanese government's position to keep NBN the company that operates our national broadband network, in public ownership. By keeping the NBN in full government ownership, we can continue to support the upgrade of the network and ensure ongoing regulatory oversight of NBN wholesale pricing, keeping broadband affordable for all Australians. A potential sale of the NBN risks significant price hikes and a reduction in service quality, particularly in rural and regional areas like Gilmore. Deputy Speaker, I have continued to lobby for upgrades to communication infrastructure in my electorate, and this government has continued to deliver. I am working hard to ensure people in Gilmore can access more reliable internet and phone coverage, helping them stay connected and run successful local businesses. The Albanese government is delivering on its commitment to improve mobile coverage for regional Australians, with new mobile phone infrastructure being built at Jamberoo, Kangaroo Valley, Termeil, Lilipilli, Warragee and Banandra. We're expanding mobile coverage and improving communications resilience to improve connectivity in regional areas. The Albanese government is narrowing the digital divide in rural and regional Australia, including by improving mobile phone and internet coverage and ensuring our communities stay connected with family and loved ones. While I continue to advocate for better mobile and internet services, and this government continues to roll out improved telecommunications infrastructure in my electorate, we have those opposite looking to sell off the NBN. The sale of this important public asset would spell disaster for regional areas like Gilmore. We've seen the mess the Liberals and former New South Wales Treasurer and Transport Minister made when they sold off publicly owned assets, including Sydney buses. The Liberals' privatisation of Telstra was a terrible policy outcome, leaving regional communities hostage to the monopoly market power of Telstra. They sold out Australia on the privatisation of Telstra, and we cannot let that happen again with the NBN. It's so important for the electorate of Gilmore to have reliable, quality internet and phone service to prevent a repeat of the loss of communications the region experienced during the 2019-2020 bushfires. Resilient power and telecommunications are essential services, especially during bushfires. That's why an Albanese Labor government is replacing the timber power poles with more resilient composite poles in my electorate to better protect emergency radio networks, ABC radio and television, mobile services and more. We've improved the resilience of power infrastructure into South Durras. South Durras narrowly missed being impacted by the Currowan fires, which underscored the need to better prepare for future bushfires and take sensible mitigation measures where appropriate. This government has relocated power cables to the local NBN fixed wireless tower underground and also replaced 30 timber power poles between South Durras and the Princess Highway with composite fireproof poles. The main benefit for a community to have composite power poles installed is electricity reliability. Unlike traditional timber power poles, composite poles are immune to termite damage, they don't rot, and they are much more resistant to the effects of fire, which means the power is more likely to stay on. In the 2029 and 2020 bushfires, the fires totally destroyed the timber poles, but the composite poles made of fiberglass that had been installed were still standing. I work closely with the Durras Community Association President, Dr Trevor Daly, and members who raised their concerns with me almost immediately after the fires subsided. Dr Daly said the power pole replacements and other critical infrastructure upgrades that would better protect the Durras community during future bushfires and other emergencies. He said upgrades of key infrastructure for improved emergency resilience were vitally important for at-risk coastal communities like Durras and were essential to protect lives and homes. Maintaining electricity, mobile phone and internet access is essential for residents to receive emergency warnings, keep track of nearby bushfire fronts and maintain communications during fires, storms and all types of emergencies. We know that one of the most terrifying things about the bushfires was that we lost power, impacting on water supply, food safety, health and, of course, communications. No one wants to see that repeated. The sale of our NBN could make internet access unaffordable and inaccessible for many Australians in regional areas who are already facing cost of living pressures, including pensioners, students and low-income earners. I will continue to work hard to help ensure local villages right across the South Coast are better protected should the worst happen again, with a key focus on affordability, reliability and resilience in power and telecommunications. I will always fight to ensure our communities are better prepared for the future, and that includes fighting to keep the NBN in public hands. I have listened to my local community and am committed to practical measures that will improve the resilience of local infrastructure to ensure they can remain disaster ready. Since the bushfires, I've been on the job with Telstra working on improved disaster resilience projects, including improved battery backup at mobile phone towers, additional mobile cells on wheels, also known as COWs, to provide mobile coverage to communities in times of need and the rollout of 5G technology. I have collaborated with NBN Co to include thousands more homes and businesses are included with a fibre to the premises upgrade plan, which will further provide some battery backup should the power go out, and absolutely crucial in times of disaster. I am also pleased to be delivering on fixing mobile black spots along the Princes Highway between Batemans Bay and Ulladulla, at Benandra and Tamil, because the 2019-2020 bushfires made it crystal clear that quality mobile coverage is critical for our community during disasters. Deputy Speaker, investments in the 2024 budget totalling $1.3 billion over 4 years will see an upgraded national broadband network, with fibre upgrades providing regional families and small businesses with access to world-class, high-quality broadband. We want to ensure the NBN stays in public hands because quality broadband unlocks digital opportunities and enables remote work and education, particularly in regional areas. The NBN improves access to telehealth and boosts economic productivity and participation in regional communities. Those opposite want to decimate that by selling the NBN, just like they have continued to recycle public assets over the past decade. There is no better example of the former government's failure on the NBN than in regional Australia. Under the Liberals, my electorate of Gilmore was hampered by second-rate internet and held back from the world of opportunity that high-quality connectivity brings. The pandemic was a very difficult time, but one thing it did do was free up the possibility of remote working. However, working from home proved frustrating for many people in regional areas such as the New South Wales South Coast due to substandard internet connectivity. Under the Liberals, we saw a huge digital divide where some suburbs in Gilmore had fast, reliable internet services, while those next door were stuck with a second-rate system. They were victims of the Coalition's second-rate NBN, which, when we were elected, was $28 billion over budget, nearly double the cost, 4 years behind schedule and backflipping to copper. In stark contrast, since coming to government, the Albanese government has worked hard to address the inequality by delivering fibre upgrades so that more Australian families and small businesses can access world-class, high-quality broadband. And I'm pleased to say that many people and communities in my electorate have benefited from the Albanese government's upgrade to full fibre NBN. We are rolling out a world-class high-speed broadband network with more than $3 billion in NBN fibre and fixed wireless upgrades being delivered on time and on budget across the country. We've installed more than 70,000 kilometres of new fibre and upgraded over 2,300 fixed wireless towers. In regional areas like mine, faster, more reliable fibre connection supports our economy, local families and small businesses. This government's investment ensures that we are receiving all the technological benefits the NBN has to offer across business, health, education, social recovery and more. The Albanese government is delivering a more connected, protected and vibrant nation, from our suburbs right through to our most remote communities. We are making key investments to enable the NBN to reach its full potential, with around 80% of all regional and remote premises and 93% of all Australian homes and businesses to have access to high-speed plans by late 2025. The NBN is critical infrastructure, which reaches to more than 12.4 million premises across Australia, with over 8.6 million homes and businesses connected. The fibre and fixed wireless upgrades we took to the 2022 election are being delivered on time and on budget in towns and villages throughout Gilmore. This means residents and businesses on the South Coast can take advantage of the faster speeds, which are increasingly important in a digital society and economy. As a former TAFE teacher, I know how reliable access to the internet is essential for students, whether they're at school, TAFE, university or studying remotely. This government's school student broadband initiative is providing thousands of struggling families and their children with a free home broadband connection so they can reach their full potential. Whilst many students can access the internet through school Wi-Fi, connecting the internet at home to support remote learning and homework is a serious affordability issue for some families. We are relieving some of the barriers to students fully participating in educational opportunities and giving them the tools they need to succeed in the classroom and beyond. The pandemic really demonstrated how important it is for students in regional areas to be connected to quality internet at home. Not having internet at home shouldn't be a barrier to a quality education. I want to see our kids reach their full potential, and having an internet connection at home can play a big part in that. I'm proud to say that more than 18,000 families have been connected to free internet until the end of 2025 through our school student broadband initiative. Reliable internet via the NBN is so important for people who live in regions like mine. I'm proud to be part of a government that takes digital inclusion so seriously, and I don't want to put that at risk. Deputy Speaker, we know how hard our businesses, individuals and the economy have been hit by online security breaches and cyber scammers. We know ordinary Australians are tightening their online security because they're understandably scared of cyber attacks on their businesses, hackers getting hold of their personal information or accessing their bank accounts, and of course there's the increasing risk of AI scams. By keeping the NBN in government hands, it means we can put stronger measures in place to protect against scams and cyber attacks. The NBN is crucial national infrastructure, with cyber security and national security imperatives requiring strong government oversight. This is best delivered through ongoing government ownership. By keeping the NBN in public ownership, the government can also reduce potential harms from gambling-like content in computer games and tackle exposure to age-inappropriate content online. And, Deputy Speaker, the sale of the NBN could wipe out all the progress we've made on First Nations digital inclusion by providing affordable and reliable internet access to remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Any future sale of the NBN by the Libs would likely involve foreign ownership, raising potentially serious national sovereignty and security risks, as well as inevitable price hikes. Only by keeping the NBN in public ownership can we continue to deliver an affordable, reliable internet service for all Australians.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll get to, in due course, what is perhaps the most farcical 6 pages of proposed legislation that I've ever encountered in the 11 or so years I've had the privilege of being in this place. But before I do, I think sometimes we assume a level of knowledge in our contributions which can be perhaps unhelpful for those who are following the debate or seeking to. So I just want to start with some basics and make a point which I don't think has been made, and I think some of those opposite might be interested to understand the shift in position that they've adopted, one which I say is welcome, but the reality is those opposite have shifted their position in relation to this proposal. The NBN Co, Mr Deputy Speaker, is an unlisted public company limited by shares incorporated under the Corporations Act of 2001 and is a Commonwealth company for the purposes of the Public Governance, Performance and Accountability Act of 2013. NBN Co was established in 2009 and as a government business enterprise by the Australian Government, which is its sole shareholder. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, under the legislative provisions, there are 2 shareholder ministers for the purposes of the NBN, which is a government business enterprise which operates at, and as it should, at arm's length to government, but is wholly owned by government. Now, the shareholder ministers, it might not be surprising to learn, are the Minister for Finance of the day and, of course, appropriately, the Minister for Communications. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, if I told you the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Communications at some point, and one of the things these shareholder ministers can do, Mr Deputy Speaker, is issue a statement of expectation. They can't operate the company. They're not directly responsible for decisions day to day, but what they can do is issue a statement of expectations. And that statement of expectations is to effectively say, you know, we, the shareholders, expect the following. And that's the way that shareholder ministers might exercise some intention in relation to the operation of a government business enterprise. Now, this nation has had a long list of finance ministers and a long list of communication ministers. And this is where I say those opposite might not be cognisant that this bill represents a change in approach for those opposite, one which I say is welcome. And as I say, I'll get to arguments around how this correlates to their proposal, particularly in the 2016 election, to create the campaign around Mediscare. But not so long ago, in fact in December 2022, the shareholder ministers, the Minister for Finance, the Senator, the Honourable Katie Gallagher, and the Minister for Communications, the Honourable Michelle Rowland, issued a new statement of expectations to the NBN Co. Now, that's perhaps not unsurprising, having come to government, being shareholder ministers responsible for such a large and important government business enterprise. What is, however, interesting is the statement provided that the, and I quote, "Government will keep NBN Co public hands for the foreseeable future." For the foreseeable future, it goes on to say, to provide the company with the certainty needed to continue delivering improvements to the network while keeping prices affordable. I end the quote. So just to go back a step, if I could, Mr Deputy Speaker, the responsible ministers, the shareholder ministers, ministers of the now government that come in here and so proudly proclaim that they urgently need to pass this bill to stop those nasty Tories from selling off the NBN, had to say in relation to the statement of expectations, and I quote, "Keep the NBN in public hands for the foreseeable future." Why the qualification? Well, the reality is those opposite had a different plan. They had a different plan, and they've now adopted this approach. And fair enough. And fair enough. But it's a point that's been missed, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this is a substantial change because they're, of the two parties of government that come into this place and do battle, one of them, it would seem, had a plan to sell the NBN. And it's not those filthy Tories, as those opposite would suggest. It wasn't us. I tell you, there aren't many conversations that take place around coalition tables that I'm not privy to. And like Anthony Albanese, who's barely mentioned the word NBN in the time that he sat and had the privilege of sitting opposite, nobody, and I can tell you nobody in the coalition is spending their time considering or indeed planning for, like those opposite would have you believe, the sale of the NBN. I'll tell you what we've been focused on from day one, and it wasn't the voice. We weren't focused on that from day one. From day one, we came into this place worried about cost of living pressures. We were worried about, Mr Deputy Speaker, the creation of the working poor. Now, that's been our focus, not what those opposite would have you believe. But I can't but help to think about how we came to this point. Now, as a former criminal barrister, I would always spend a lot of time thinking about motive, and in particular, what might have motivated my clients to act in a particular way and what indeed the prosecution would be thinking about my clients' motives. So I can't help but bring that methodology to most everything I do in this place. And so when I heard that those opposite were going to present a bill to the Parliament, which, by the way, spans a gargantuan 6 pages, only because it's in like 14 font and been formatted as a way to save lots of white space, I thought to myself, what's motivating this? It's come like a bolt from the blue. And then I thought, oh, hang on a minute. We've got the Prime Minister under a bit of pressure. You might recall that the Prime Minister was having to ask questions around whether he had accepted upgrades or indeed sought to solicit upgrades. And that was running pretty hot, I'd like to think. And so I reckon the tactics teams, the hard heads within the Labor Party are like, you know what, we've got to go to the draw. And when I say the draw, you know what I mean, the draw labelled distraction. And so they went straight to that draw, they pulled it out, and unfortunately, to be fair, they've been under a bit of pressure lately, and there's been lots of things pulled out of that drawer. I don't think anyone's replenished the drawer. So they've looked up on the wall and someone's seen, reports from the 2016 election congratulating themselves on what a fantastic campaign it was. I mean, the then Leader of the Opposition probably didn't think it was that good a campaign on the morning after, but in any event, there was a number of people interested in the sophology and campaign strategy, thinking it was a fantastic campaign. And one of the shining lights of that campaign was Medicare. This idea that the coalition had some sort of plan to sell off Medicare. I mean, I laugh even now about it, but we shouldn't, because it was pretty serious at the time. We had older constituents calling us. At one stage, I thought it might have been called Granny Scare, because older constituents reliant on Medicare because they're at that phase in their life where they're in need of lots of medical assistance, literally crying on the phone to me, saying, why would you plan to do this, Tony? And night after night explaining to people that this was just a horrid scare campaign by those opposite. I mean, how anyone could think you could privatise an entity responsible for giving away, or at least transferring large sums of public resources, public funds, I don't quite understand. I mean, it's one of the most significant line items in the federal budget. But in any event, those opposite were very successful in prosecuting that campaign. It's one of the reasons, I think, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why the then opposition came very close to attaining government in 2016. So back to the hardheads. The hardheads are in Labor Party Central thinking, gee, we're in trouble. The Prime Minister's approval ratings are falling off the cliff. He's not so much marching us off the cliff, but asking us run to the cliff. We need to do something about this. We've got a nervous backbench, and the last thing we want is a Prime Minister who's having to answer questions about, first-term MPs who are worried about having, been introduced to the Chairman's Lounge and Aussies and the, benefits of flying business class around Australia, are worried about losing these entitlements. We've got to take action. We need something like Mediscare. That's what they would have said. Something like Mediscare. What can we say? What can we say those filthy Tories are going to sell? Oh, wait a minute. The NBN. Let's just run FibreScare. I mean, it's not Mediscare. Let's run FibreScare. And so into the parliament comes a bill to seek to sell to seek to protect the NBN from privatisation in circumstances where no one, not even the Prime Minister was talking about this, and certainly no one on the opposition benches. And were this a serious proposal, it wouldn't have been laughed off by the Fourth Estate as it has been. Now, rather than become the distraction that they were hoping, it's really become a joke, and it's now emblematic of what's happening to those opposite. While Australians, I appreciate the member for Kennedy. Well, one day I might have the privilege of answering your questions in question time, but not now. While Australians are worried about cost of living pressures, while we've got Australians having to say to their children, look, I'd love to enrol you in that sport, but we can't afford it. While we've got Australians taking decisions about how much underinsurance they factor in because they can't afford to pay the full insurance bill. While we've got Australians talking to their councils about having to enter into payment plans. While we've got Australians who leave the energy bill in the envelope on the fridge for fear of opening it. While we've got those circumstances, while we've got Australians walking down the aisles of supermarkets, avoiding quality fresh fruit and vegetables because it's expensive, while we've got other Australians, dual-income Australians, lining up at food bank in unprecedented numbers, the working poor I mentioned today. While we've got those set of circumstances, while we've got other Australians having to get onto the bank and say, can we enter into a special arrangement regarding our mortgages because we're currently paying up to $45,000 more in interest than we were 2 years ago. While we've got Australians struggling with all of these pressures, which, by the way, for those opposite, I'm sure they appreciate, is feeding into the mental health stresses that are operating on individuals and families. While we're dealing with those circumstances as a nation, a flat-out crisis, a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, those opposite, instead of sitting around at head office and working on how they can deal with this homegrown inflation crisis, they're thinking about how they can hoodwink the Australian people into thinking that something that has absolutely no veracity can be sold to the Australian people. Now, fear is the strongest motivational force. Aside from consistency, fear is the strongest force effectively anywhere in the world. And those opposite have decided that they're going to take Mediscare and make it 2.0. But this time, it's going to be FibreScare, isn't it? It's going to be FibreScare because we're going to sell it. But you heard from the contribution for those opposite. Not just sell it, we're going to stop them selling it to those nasty internationals. I mean, please. A note to the Prime Minister, who's not in the country. There's a surprise. He's off and away. Come home, focus on the cost of living pressures, help Australian households, families and businesses with this crisis. It's your challenge. When we had ours during COVID, we stumped up and acted in their best interests.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Hawke.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Albanese Labor government remains firmly committed to keeping the NBN in public ownership, ensuring that it serves the interests of all Australians. The NBN is too vital to be gambled with, and it's too critical to our digital and economic future to fall into private hands. Our decision to retain the NBN in public ownership is grounded in the very hard lessons of the past. The Coalition's reckless push to privatise Telstra left regional Australia at the mercy of monopoly market power and stunted broadband growth nationwide. Labor, in contrast, believes in a connected Australia. It's why we launched the NBN in 2008 as a public asset, to ensure reliable, affordable, high-speed internet for all Australians. Labor laid the foundation for a government-owned broadband network designed to propel Australia into the digital age. This vision was championed by former Senator Stephen Conroy, the first Minister for Communications responsible for the NBN. His foresight and his dedication were instrumental in ensuring the NBN's effective establishment and initial rollout, laying the foundations for a network that will provide equitable access to high-speed internet across the nation. Despite successive Liberal governments' efforts to undermine the NBN and divert it from its original purpose, Senator Conroy's leadership remains central to its enduring success. You might allow me the indulgence, Deputy Speaker. I disclose that I worked for Senator Conroy for a long period of time, 6 years, during the period of the NBN's initial rollout. You can commit some fairly serious crimes and go to prison for less time than I worked for Stephen Conroy. And, with the greatest of respect to Stephen Conroy, you can have a more enjoyable time while you're there. But I would have to say of Senator Conroy, or former Senator Conroy, he was entirely and sometimes painfully visionary about the role of the NBN, not just as a piece of technology, but as an opus of critical economic infrastructure that would build Australia's economy, that would allow Australia to continue to grow, to explore new economic opportunities and to take those economic opportunities to the world. And I think that vision has actually borne out much more rapidly than anyone initially thought might be the case. Deputy Speaker, the importance of the NBN for peri-urban and regional communities like mine cannot be overstated. These areas are hubs of growing families, small businesses and essential industries. However, they often face unique challenges in accessing the same level of services enjoyed in metropolitan centres. Reliable, high-speed internet is one way we can combat that disadvantage, by connecting communities like Hawke to critical services such as health and education. In healthcare, the NBN is enabling a revolution in how services are delivered to peri-urban and regional areas. Telehealth consultations are now a lifeline for patients who would otherwise need to travel long distances to see a specialist. High-speed internet makes it possible for doctors to provide timely, accurate diagnoses via video consultations. This connectivity reduces wait times, lowers travel costs and ensures that, where possible, families in Hawke have access to world-class healthcare without leaving our community. Similarly, the NBN is transforming education. High-speed internet has unlocked access to a wealth of online resources, virtual classrooms and remote learning opportunities. Students in Hawke can now participate in interactive science experiments, collaborate with peers across the country, and even attend advanced courses offered by institutions in urban centres, all from their local school or home. This connectivity ensures that all Australians, no matter where they live, have the tools they need to compete and to thrive. Deputy Speaker, when Labor first envisioned the NBN, it was about more than faster internet. It was about building a fairer, more connected, more prosperous Australia. For peri-urban and regional communities like Hawke, where I live, the NBN is not just a utility, it is a driver of equity and opportunity. It breaks down barriers to essential services, fosters innovation, and strengthens the very fabric of our communities. By keeping the NBN in public ownership, we ensure these vital benefits continue to flow, not just for today, but for the generations to come. Labor's vision for the NBN is a vision for a stronger, more connected nation, where all Australians, no matter where they live, can access the opportunities that they deserve. Today, the NBN has made remarkable progress. Over 12.4 million premises are ready to connect, with 8.6 million homes and businesses actively connected. 97% of the fixed line network can now access speeds of at least 50 megabits per second, with over 9 million premises enabled for gigabit speeds. By the end of 2025, 90% of Australian homes and businesses will have access to gigabit speeds, a testament to our commitment to world-class connectivity. These upgrades matter. They reduce fault rates and technician call-outs, meaning fewer disruptions for households and businesses. Since coming to office, we've rolled out 70,000 kilometres of new fibre and have $480 million in fixed wireless upgrades on track to be finished by the end of this year. Over 2,300 towers have been upgraded, with speeds now capable of up to 100 megabits per second, including new fixed wireless products offering speeds of 250 and 400 megabits per second. It's not just about speed, it's about economic growth. Economic research estimates that a faster, higher capacity NBN will boost Australia's GDP by $400 billion between now and 2030. Every increase of 1 megabit per second in average broadband speed is estimated to add 0.04% to our GDP, with the benefits felt even more profoundly in remote communities, where faster broadband generates up to 16 times the GDP uplift compared to metropolitan areas. Labor's vision for the NBN extends to those who need it most. Through our school student broadband initiative, over 18,000 families now have free internet until the end of 2025, ensuring our young Australians are not left behind. And for rural and remote areas, our Sky Muster Plus satellite service now offers uncapped data plans and maximum speeds up to 100 megabits per second, expanding opportunities for education, work and social connection. Deputy Speaker, affordability and reliability are at the heart of our public ownership commitment. Since 2017, communications prices in Australia have decreased by 9%, even as CPI rose by 22%. This stability has been achieved because we've kept the NBN under government control. preventing price hikes intended to prepare for privatisation, hikes the Coalition would have readily endorsed. Labor is invested in an NBN that works for every Australian, and we've made it affordable for every Australian. We rejected the Coalition's proposed price hike and instead chose to make broadband accessible to masses. Unlike the Coalition, we will not gamble with our nation's digital infrastructure by selling it off. The Coalition, through their early legislative steps, prepared the NBN for sale and even supported increasing wholesale prices to bolster income streams for a future private owner. The NBN is too essential to be anything but a publicly owned asset. Beyond economics, it's critical for our national security and our cyber resilience. Government oversight ensures that our network remains protected from potential foreign ownership and associated risks to sovereignty. Deputy Speaker, this bill also sends a clear message about the role of government in ensuring equitable access to essential services. The National Broadband Network is not just a utility. As I said before, it is a social equaliser. By keeping the NBN in public hands, we are prioritising connectivity for every Australian, regardless of where they live or their personal financial circumstances. A publicly owned NBN means that families in rural and regional Australia who have long faced the double burden of higher costs and inferior services can finally expect to be treated equally. This is a government taking action, not leaving outcomes to chance or profit motives. This legislation also reflects the evolving role of digital infrastructure in our daily lives. The NBN is no longer just about providing internet for entertainment. It's the foundation for telehealth, remote work, online education and smart agriculture. Farmers in our regions use it to monitor weather patterns and improve crop yields. Students rely on it for virtual classrooms and access to global educational resources. Startups and small businesses depend on fast, reliable broadband to connect with markets worldwide. The Albanese government understands that safeguarding the NBN is about safeguarding Australia's future competitiveness and opportunities for innovation. Deputy Speaker, we must not forget the risks of doing otherwise. Privatising the NBN, as those opposite have toyed with in the past and, I dare say, are toying with as we speak, would turn this essential service into just another for-profit enterprise. We've seen where this leads. Costs rise, services decline, and those in less profitable areas are left behind. Australians are still grappling with the consequences of Telstra's privatisation, and we cannot allow history to repeat itself. The National Broadband Network is too vital to be sold off and sacrificed for short-term fiscal gain or political expedience, or, in the case of those opposite over their last term of government, to plug their budgetary black holes. It's also worth addressing the economic impact of public ownership. Keeping the NBN in public hands isn't just about protecting consumers. It's about securing long-term returns for our nation. A publicly owned NBN continues to generate value for Australian taxpayers while ensuring services remain accessible and affordable. This is a government making sound, future-focused investments, not hollowing out essential infrastructure for short-term political wins. Lastly, Deputy Speaker, this bill is about protecting Australia's sovereignty and security in a digital age. A publicly owned NBN ensures that critical infrastructure remains under Australian control, safeguarding our national security interests. In an era where cybersecurity threats are increasing, our government, this Labor government, is ensuring that one of our most important assets is protected, managed and operated exclusively in the national interest. The Albanese Labor government believes the National Broadband Network belongs to the Australian people. every family, every worker, every business. It is a fundamental pillar of equity, economic growth and national security. By keeping it in public hands, we ensure it serves everyone, not just the special few. That is what good government does, Deputy Speaker. It builds a fairer, better future for all Australians.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Kennedy.
Mr Speaker, I have the privilege, I think, of being the only historian in the Parliament or in the Senate. My published work was published by the Murdoch Press, the big boys on the block, and so I can speak with some authority on the history of our country. I was brought up in a country where the wool industry had carried Australia for some 200 years, and in 1990 it was still the biggest export earner that this country had. Mr Keating deregulated the wool industry. He's a free marketeer. He believes in private enterprise running and owning everything. And as a result of this deregulation of the wool industry, now effectively we have no wool industry at all. We still have some fat sheep, but there's no wool industry now at all. To take my own state electorate, we had 3.5 million sheep. I doubt whether we've got 100,000 sheep there now. In the cattle industry, our cattle numbers are down 8 million. So the wool industry's gone completely. The cattle industry is down from 32 million down to 24 million, the herd. So one wonders what the hell's going on out there. Well, nothing is going on out there. That's what's happening. The sugar industry, which worked Australia out of the Great Depression and is the third or fourth biggest agricultural earner and about the 12th biggest earner of export income for Australia. All of the sugar mills were Australian-owned. 23 of them were farmer-owned and 3 were Australian corporate-owned. Now all 26 mills, 23, 3 have closed, all 23 mills are foreign-owned. So, I mean, you wreck the wool industry, you wreck the sugar industry, you've been an absolute disaster for the cattle industry. Now, you'll notice I'm not saying Liberals or Labor, because both of them have been heavily involved in the disasters that have occurred and taken place in agriculture in Australia. Let me switch to the electricity industry. We don't necessarily represent people like myself, just rural industries. I speak with authority because I was the electricity minister in Queensland. And when the government fell in 1990 to the socialists, or so-called socialists, the ALP, the price of electricity for a household was $640. Now, Mr Acting Speaker, there is no justification for electricity being over $700. And I should know because I was the minister. Now, not only was I the minister, but I was also the minister that put the first standalone solar system in Australia. In 1983, when most of you weren't even born, we put the first solar system in. So I know the industry's backwards, and being a mining man, I know the cost of mining and processing silicon into solar cells. Now, Mr Speaker, the great tragedy of this is there is no justification. I can't speak with authority for the other states, but in Queensland there is no justification for anyone paying over $700 for their electricity. And they're currently paying $3,200 for their electricity. And for those people that put the solar panels on your roof and get your electricity from solar, well, we're going to cut down 500 million trees in Australia, and we're going to have solar electricity. Well, I don't know that that's a good trade. About 5 million acres is going to be denuded and turned into an industrial wasteland of rotting glass and aluminium. Mr Acting Speaker, for those, and that includes the Honourable Minister, Plibersek, she knows that we have algae ponds from a coal-fired power station. They can absorb all of the CO2. Admittedly, you need a lot of land and a lot of water to do it. All the CO2, and you'll make, I think, on the figures I've seen, more money out of the algae than you'll make out of selling the electricity. Now, we're talking tonight about the communication system of Australia, and it's an essential service. There were 2 people died on cattle station that I own, 250,000 acres. They died on the boundary, and if there had been telephone service there, one of them would have survived. There were 3 cattle boys, my father and his 2 brothers, and I come from a family, went out in a stagecoach in the 1870s or 1880s to the middle of nowhere, and that's where we've always lived. The 3 cattle boys, 2 of them died as a result of the tyranny of distance. So, I mean, if we're talking here tonight about communication systems, then we're talking about the tyranny of distance. My uncle, Norman, got injured in a motor car accident, then again in rugby league. And by the time the plane got back from Longreach, the plane had been in Cloncurry. He would have got to Brisbane in time and his life would have been saved. But the plane was in Longreach. By the time it came back to Cloncurry and then went to Brisbane, it was too late and he died. My father had had cancer, and he was supposed to get an operation, and it was airline strike. He wouldn't jump the queue, so he waited 3.5 months. He was in no condition to drive down, so, you know, airline was the only way of getting there. And by the time he got down there, the cancer had got away and he died. So 2 of the 3 cattle boys died as a result of the tyranny of distance. Now, we were trapped during the wet season. My father rather foolishly tried to drive on, it was all dirt road to Brisbane then, in the wet season, very bad mistake, and we all nearly perished. We were sitting in the car with our rosary beads saying prayers, and my father had 3rd-degree burns. He tried to walk for help, and by some miracle we were rescued. But if we had had the telecommunications we have today, then that would not have occurred. That danger would not have existed. So it is quite literally, for where I come from, a matter of life and death. Now, Ernie Camp represents one of the biggest shires in Queensland, the Burke Shire, right up in the northwestern corner of Queensland. And Ernie's wife said that they're just driven off their head because of the lack of telecommunication speed with their computers. John Nelson, one of the leading cattlemen in Australia, probably one of the 30 or 40 biggest cattlemen in Australia. I said, if you had your choice of what you want, I thought he'd say water or freeholding or something like that. He said, a proper internet speed. So there were 2 people, most prominent people in outback Australia, and both of them were saying internet speed. Now, the Liberals and Labor Party, the Labor Party likes to pretend that they're not. It's the Liberals that want to privatise everything. But if you actually have a look at the privatisation, they did most of the privatisation, not the Liberals. I'm sure the Liberals would have if they were there, but Keating hadn't left much in the cupboard for him. There was nothing much for them to sell. Of course, we all know the reasons why Christine Holgate was sacked, because she wouldn't sell Australia Post. And in fact, the mortal sin, she wanted to turn Australia Post into a people's own bank. Heavens! The people of Australia owning their own bank and controlling money. What a communistic outlook she had. So they had to sack one of the greatest businesswomen the country had ever produced, or ever will produce, probably. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about the government. Now, they're claiming that we don't need universal service obligation, the amendment that I have proposed. Now, we can't find, and I have highly skilled people, one of them was a senior council advisor producing documentation for the New South Wales government, definitely no slouch, and she can't find anywhere here where there is actually a statement that there is a responsibility for a universal service obligation. Now, I can't conclude my speech without mentioning, Ben Chifley, the Prime Minister without peer, easily the greatest Prime Minister the country ever had, a protege of the great Red Ted Theodore. But Chifley gave Australia, he eradicated tuberculosis, he gave us the Snowy Mountain Scheme, which doubled agricultural production in Australia and gave us a secure electricity supply for all of Australia, up until now, I emphasise. And he gave us secondary industry, the Holden motor car as well. What a fantastic contribution to the Australian nation. And of course, he's in the history books. Now, Kevin Rudd will also be in the history books because he gave us the best communication system anywhere in the world, the NBN. And no one can ever take that away from Kevin. He also gave us the NDIS, which I think may be the most marvellous thing I've seen done since I've been here. It's got a lot of teething problems, but that's natural. Now, going back to the NBN, all I can say is that we're a long way from where we should be. When I have people like Ernie Kemp's wife, Ernie Kemp's family, like mine, have been there since the 1870s, I think, maybe longer. And one of the, 20, maybe 30 or 40 biggest cattlemen in Australia, both saying to me that the problem is communications. So I urge the government to accept what we're proposing, the amendment, saying there's a universal service obligation. When it was proposed in the Liberal National Party room that we were going to privatise Telstra, I left to my feet. I was still in the party room then, with great anger, and a man I had immense respect for, John Howard. John Howard assured me that I had no worries that there would be a universal service obligation. Well, much as I love John and respect him, I sure would like to put the number of complaints we've had about telecommunications. I did a quick glance there's something like 200 complaints this year coming into my office. So, I mean, where's the universal service obligation? It's a joke. And you're moving now into an area where, we've got no guarantees. And if you say that it's going to provide a wonderful service for everybody, well, why don't you put it in the legislation? I mean, it is silly to think that Mary Thomas, living in Julia Creek, is going to sue Telstra. At least give her the chance to sue Telstra, please, with a universal service obligation. And you've got to ask the question, if you're saying that you're giving it, well, where is it in the legislation? Where is it in the regulations? And Minister, whether you're responsible or the Minister that may be primarily responsible, would you please tell the Parliament and the people of Australia where is the universal service obligation? And if it's not there, would you please accept our amendment? And I think I have some locus standi here, representing about a tenth of the surface area of Australia, and one of the biggest electorates in population in Australia, ironically. So I think I have some locus standi here. And having come from a family that has suffered and lost so much as a result of the tyranny of distance, I think that also qualifies me to state where is the universal service obligation. When we, bog to the eyeballs in the motor car, and then the sun came out and the rain went away. We had about 17 hours to survive. You can take some water out of the radiator, and we had a fair amount of water with us. But my father, when he tried to work for help, ended up with third-degree burns and was hospitalised for almost a week, recovering from heat stroke and trying to save our lives, whilst we sat in the car with our rosary beads saying prayers. I won't say how we were rescued, but if we had had a mobile telephone, that terrible situation could have been avoided and should be in the future.
The member's time has expired. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And if I could take the opportunity to thank you for my 2025 calendar, which arrived today. And in that 2025 calendar, I'm going to mark 2025 is the year that we roll out more fibre broadband to Ashfield. I'll mark that in the calendar. More fibre broadband to Bassendean in my electorate. I'll mark in the calendar that we put more fibre out in Bayswater after years and years and calendars of failure when it comes to the national broadband network under those opposite. And while I'll get the opportunity to continue my remarks, if I think about the calendars, if you would have marked the date of 20 December 2010 in your calendar, Deputy Speaker, you would know that that was the day that those opposite, under their then leader Tony Abbott, said, quote, "Do we really want to invest $50 billion of hard-earned taxpayers' money in what was essentially a video entertainment system?" That's where we've come from, Deputy Speaker. If we were to go forward a few years into the calendar, look at 9 April 2013. That's when the leader of those opposite told us, "We are absolutely confident that 25 megs is going to be enough, more than enough, for the average household."
It being 7:30 p.m, I propose the question that the House to now adjourn, and the member will have opportunity to continue his remarks. I call the